Well, this election cycle, it's really something, right? I mean, today marks 1 year since those Hamas attacks on Israel, and it's just so, I don't know, it feels so strange having this somber anniversary right in the middle of such a heated presidential race. Like, imagine campaign rallies happening at the same time as these memorials and commemorations. It's definitely a first, at least in my memory.
It's unprecedented, and, it's really a tough situation for these candidates. They have to walk this fine line between showing global leadership, being there for Israel, but also addressing what people here at home are worried about, like the economy, healthcare, all that stuff.
It's like they're trying to shift from a moment of silence straight into a debate about tax cuts.
Speaking of which, we've got VP Kamala Harris running for a second term against, well, I mean, everyone knows who, right? Former President Donald Trump. And those polls, let's just say, it's still anyone's game. States like Arizona, Nevada, even North Carolina, they're all still up for grabs.
Those battleground states are definitely the ones to watch, especially right now as we get closer to this 1 year anniversary of the attacks. How the candidates respond to something this significant, this emotionally charged, it could really sway voters, especially those who are still on the fence. Especially with so much else happening, too. We've got Hurricane Milton about to make landfall, this rise in anti-Semitism. Well, let's just say there's a lot going on. So we're going to try to break it all down today. We're doing a deep dive into some articles from the Washington Post to see how exactly this anniversary is playing into this election.
From how they're talking about it on the campaign trail to their actual policy positions, even how public opinion is being affected, it's all connected.
Let's start with how Harris and Trump are publicly acknowledging this anniversary because, well, they kind of have to. It's become like a political necessity these days. Harris went for a more traditional route. She planted a tree at the VP residence with her husband, put out a statement remembering the victims, very somber, very respectful.
Yeah, it's a classic way of showing empathy and solidarity, putting herself in line with that national feeling of mourning.
Then you have Trump, and, well, he did things a little differently, as always. He had this whole gathering with Jewish leaders, but it was at his golf resort in Miami.
Interesting choice of venue. Some people might see that as him just trying to connect with his base, but others might see it as, typical Trump mixing business with politics.
And, gotta love him, Trump couldn't resist reminding everyone that, and I quote, no one, and I mean no one, has done more for the Jewish people than him. Which, coming from the guy who moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and visited Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson's tomb just this morning, it's not that surprising.
That visit to the rabbi's tomb, especially now during the election, it's hard not to see it as a way of appealing to those religious voters, a group he's definitely been trying to get on his side since, well, forever.
It's a whole thing he's got going on, that's for sure. But we got to give credit where credit's due. Harris also reaffirmed her commitment to Israel's right to defend itself, while also saying that, we got to do something to help the people in Gaza.
It's tough, right? Trying to support your ally, but also acknowledging the human cost of all this. And it's a debate that's not just happening on the world stage, but within the Democratic Party itself.
Because, let's be real, after those initial attacks, Israel's response in Gaza, well, it was a lot. And it's caused a lot of people here to question whether it was justified or not. We even saw some polls that said that even Democrats are starting to think that maybe Israel went too far.
And that's where you really see the difference between the two parties. The question then becomes, how much is this going to matter when people actually get to the voting booth? Is it going to be more important than the economy, than healthcare, than all these other things?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And leads us right to something Trump's been calling his Trump card. And no, it's not some secret weapon he's got hidden away. He's talking about immigration.
Ah, yes, immigration, something that's been, let's say, central to his whole thing from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah. And now that we're getting down to the wire, he's doubling down, even made this comment recently about some immigrants having bad genes, which is, well, you can imagine how that went over.
Yeah.
That's definitely one of those comments that's, well, it's a loaded statement for a lot of reasons. First, you got to remember, it's not just some random thing he said. It's the same kind of language that's been used to justify all sorts of discrimination throughout history, like, the Chinese Exclusion Act, even the Holocaust.
Like a dog whistle. If you know, you know. It's a way of saying something to a very specific group of people without actually saying it directly.
Exactly. And in this case, it's hard not to see it as him trying to, I don't know, stir up those fears people have about race, about ethnicity, about cultures changing. And those fears are even higher now because of what happened with Hamas and everything else that's going on in the world. And we can't forget about how this kind of talk might affect certain groups.
Especially in those swing states we were talking about before, like Arizona, Nevada. They've got big Hispanic populations. Even a small change there could make a difference.
Exactly. And it's not just about immigration either. This is part of a bigger pattern with Trump, this way he uses language to divide people, and it ends up pushing minority groups further to the margins. Remember the Muslim ban and all that stuff about the border wall? Those weren't just policies, they were ways of appealing to a certain type of voter.
Creating that us versus them mentality, right? And sadly, it's working on a lot of people. But it's also making things worse in our country.
Yeah.
One survey we saw said that 61%, can you believe that? 61% of Jewish people in the U.S. have experienced anti-Semitism since the Hamas attacks last year. That's insane.
And those weren't just one-off things either. That same survey said that a lot of those people said these experiences would actually change how they vote in this election. So this whole climate of fear is not just changing how people vote, but it's also affecting how the candidates are running their campaigns.
So now it's about more than just policy, domestic or foreign. It's about feeling safe, feeling like you can be yourself. Which brings us to how they're actually using this anniversary on the campaign trail. Because guess what? They're both using it to their advantage.
Of course, it's a huge emotional event, and they know they can use it to try and win over those undecided voters.
Oh, absolutely. Like Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, remember him, the venture capitalist. He wrote that book about like the struggles of working class white people. Anyway, he's pretty new to politics, but he's definitely on Team Trump.
And he's been using his platform to go after the Biden administration about how they've dealt with the hostages that were taken.
Oh, yeah. He went on this whole rant at a rally on the anniversary, which, by the way, was organized by this Christian group. He was saying that Biden and Harris haven't even tried to get those hostages back.
Which is, not true. According to what we found, the U.S. helped get some of the hostages released back in November, a few months after it happened, and they even gave intelligence that helped rescue some others in June. People need to have the right facts, especially with something this important.
You're telling me it feels like Vance is just saying whatever he wants, hoping no one will fact-check him. But again, this seems to be a trend this election, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes you wonder about, how true is the information that's being spread during these campaigns, and how easy is it for misinformation to just, spread like wildfire?
That's a whole other deep dive right there. But let's get back to Harris. She's not really talking about the hostages. Instead, her new ads are all about, drum roll, January 6th.
Trying to change the subject, trying to remind people what Trump did or didn't do during those riots at the Capitol. It's a risky move. Could turn off those moderate voters who are probably sick of hearing about it.
Yeah, but it's a calculated risk. They're even using some of the news stuff that came out for that investigation into Trump and January 6th. The one everyone thought was over. Yeah, well, there were still some bombshells in there.
Oh, yeah. Some of it was pretty bad. Like, they said that when Trump found out that Pence had to be evacuated from the Capitol, for his own safety, Trump just said, so what?
It gives me chills, seriously. That just shows you what kind of guy he is, right? Doesn't even care about his own vice president.
It definitely fits with what Harris is trying to say, that Trump is dangerous, that he doesn't care about democracy, that he'd rather incite violence than have a peaceful transfer of power.
It's like watching a political thriller, except it's actually happening. Okay, enough about the drama. Let's talk about what matters. Policy. At the end of the day, that's what's really going to affect people's lives.
You got it. And yeah, the anniversary is important, but voters need to know where the candidates stand on things here at home, starting with the economy.
Because, let's be honest, those boring policy details never get as much attention as a good scandal. So we've got Harris saying she's going to raise taxes on billionaires to pay for her economic plan, helping small businesses, investing in green energy, making sure the super rich finally pay their fair share. It all sounds great, right?
Definitely appeals to a lot of people, especially those who feel like the system only benefits the wealthy.
Right, but then there's Trump, and, well, it's hard to say what his plan is besides cutting taxes.
And those cuts have consequences. One study we looked at said that Trump's plans would add twice as much to the national debt as Harris's. Twice. This is where I've got to look past the talk and see what it means for you and me.
Exactly. We're talking about our jobs, how much we pay in taxes, whether we can afford health care, education. These are the things that matter, no matter who you're voting for.
It's about looking at the big picture, understanding how these policies will affect us not just now, but in the years to come.
And speaking of big pictures, remember that toughest bipartisan border security bill in decades, Harris keeps talking about, the one that's supposed to, fix everything about immigration. Yeah, it turns out it's not that simple.
This is where things get interesting, because immigration, that's an issue that always gets people fired up, and politicians know it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So remember when Biden first got elected? He said he was going to create a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, which everyone who cares about immigration was super happy about. It felt like we were finally going to have a fairer system.
Yeah, a lot of people felt like it was way past time.
Totally.
Yeah.
But now that it's election time again, Harris is singing a different tune. Suddenly, it's all about deportations, being tough on border crossings, and no one's talking about citizenship anymore.
Interesting how that happened.
Right. You'd think those immigration groups would be freaking out, but they've been quiet.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Is Harris just trying to get those moderate voters who are worried about border security?
Could be. Elections are about getting the most votes, and immigration is one of those issues that can really swing things.
It's like she's trying to be tougher on immigration than Trump, which, well, that's one way to do it. But there's a problem, right? She could lose those progressive voters who thought she was going to be more compassionate.
It's a balancing act, that's for sure. And it just goes to show how complicated it is to run for office in a country where everyone's got a different opinion.
It's a risky move, that's for sure. Makes you wonder if we're just, kicking the can down the road, solving problems for now and hoping for the best later.
Definitely something to think about. But it just shows you how important this whole immigration thing is. It gets people riled up, and both sides know it can win them an election.
And it's not just about the policies themselves. It's about how they talk about them to younger voters. I mean, Harris even went on that Call Her Daddy podcast the other day. You know the one. Super popular with those millennial and Gen Z women.
Smart move. Young voters, especially young women, they've been a big factor in recent elections. Campaigns are realizing they got to keep up with the times, go where the voters are, even if it's not the usual places.
It's like they're trying to break out of that bubble, Talk to people who aren't glued to the news all day.
Yeah.
But speaking of reaching voters, let's talk about how these candidates are actually getting their message out there. Because we all know money matters in politics, and the way they're spending it on digital ads, well, it's kind of wild.
A whole new ball game, right? Using those algorithms and stuff to target certain people with very specific messages.
Yeah.
It's not like the old days with newspaper ads and TV debates.
It's all about those algorithms. And from what we've seen, Democrats like Harris, they're outspending Republicans on almost every platform, except one. Any guesses?
Knowing what we know, I'd say it's X, right? What used to be Twitter? The one Elon Musk owns.
Ding, ding, ding.
You have a winner.
And seeing as how Musk is, let's say, Team Trump, it's not exactly a shocker, is it?
Makes you wonder if there's some bias there, right? How information is being controlled, especially during an election. It's a good reminder that online, we're not just reading stuff, we're swimming in a sea of algorithms and corporate interests.
It's a jungle out there.
So, as we wrap this up, it really makes you think. We've talked about a lot today, the anniversary of Hamas attacks, all the political games, the policy debates, how public opinion is changing, those crazy digital platforms. It's a lot.
It really shows you how complicated this election is. We've got domestic issues, international issues, a country that can't seem to agree on anything. But if there's one thing we hope you take away from this, it's this. Stay curious, stay informed, and don't check out. Don't let all the noise drown out what's important. Pay attention, think for yourselves, and don't forget how powerful your voice is. Because at the end of the day, our democracy only works if we're all paying attention and participating. That's all we've got for you today, but keep those brains buzzing, deep divers.